This morning we're at Decatur Cemetery. It's the oldest public burial grounds in the Atlanta area. Decatur Cemetery is the cemetery where I fell in love with cemeteries. I lived here when I was in college in that red roof building back there in the distance. So a short walk over here, and most days I'd walk my dog through this cemetery. Shout out Jezebelle, rest in peace. This cemetery was thought to be founded before the founding of Decatur. Decatur was founded in 1823. This is the grave of Dr. Ormond Morgan, and on the stone it reads, believed to be the first adult burial in Decatur Cemetery. Back when this cemetery was first founded, when Decatur was first founded, this was the frontier of Georgia. Georgia started down on the coast in Savannah and then spread westward, sort of off of the Savannah River. And after the turn of the 19th century, slowly Georgia crept over the Indian territories. There are a couple of Revolutionary War soldiers buried here. This is one of them, Mr. John Hayes. If you look at this walkway here in the 1880s, they took a lot of Stone Mountain granite and laid granite blocks to create walkways through the cemetery. Here's one of the earlier burials, and you can see how they crudely scratched in the names. This cemetery holds a special place in my heart. I've felt every emotion. I've been in every state of mind in this cemetery. In my college days, it was a lot of fun to come here any time of day. Here are some of the other earlier burials. This man was buried in 1827. This cemetery is on the National Historic Register, and I read that application. And in that application, it talks about how some of these burials may have been made when they were next to a church. And it got me thinking about how we are not necessarily on the top of the hill here. These are sort of on the side of the hill. And so while I'm speculating, you can maybe envision that there may have been a church up there at the crest of the hill at one time. I haven't been here in a couple years, and I'm really excited to see some of the newer monuments, not only in the old section, but especially in the new section, this being one of them. This burial was in 2019, and there's a little windmill or wind thing at the top. I really love some of the narrow walkways through this cemetery. Some of the paths sort of just dead end. Here's another example of the pathways just sort of meandering through the cemetery, just kind of thrown in haphazardly. Some of this was likely done in the 1880s during the beautification effort, where they brought in a lot of Stone Mountain granite. There's this huge magnolia tree here, and under this magnolia is the Candler family plot. This is the grave of Milton Candler. He served in the U.S. House of Representatives. Some of his family may be a little bit better known. His brother, Asa Candler, was the founder of the Coca-Cola Company, and Asa Candler's son, Asa Candler Jr., owned Westview Cemetery for a while, which I will do a video on one day. A lot of cool history within this family. This is the plot sort of at the crest of the hill under the magnolia tree on the Candler plot. I've always loved this monument here with the urn and the shroud draped over it. Turning around from this Candler plot, we come up on this gazebo. This was originally a well house. So imagine being in the middle of a cemetery and this is where you come get your water. This is another really meaningful spot here for me. I spent a lot of time under this gazebo, just hanging out with the dew. This very ornate grave here is the grave of Emily Pittman. I don't remember exactly the history on it, but part of it entails how she is the only one buried here within this little plot, and there's no other family of hers around. Here's a good surviving example of the Stone Mountain granite that was put in the 1880s. This used to go all the way around the old cemetery, and now they've put some asphalt in. You can see where it begins right there. This is a very ornate cast iron grave from 1868. You can see the weeping willow in the top right. I've always really loved this section right here specifically. The large magnolia trees. And especially this little walkway right here. Just something about the way the stones are being heaved up by the root systems of the magnolia. as we walk through this cemetery this morning. Once again, such a beautiful thing to see as that sun starts to cast itself across the cemetery. I'm back up under the gazebo. Through the trees there, that building used to be a Kroger that I worked at when I first moved here. Came in one day and told my boss I was flying to London the next day and quit. There's a couple field stones mixed in. And this is the crest of the hill, and this suggests to me that maybe there were some burials here at the crest of the hill. Maybe that church was somewhere else. This empty lot next to it, I would almost guarantee there's burials throughout it. And another example is some of these little janky pathways. Here's another Revolutionary War soldier, mixed in with some of these hand-carved monuments that I showed earlier in the video. This was very much the Georgia frontier when these people were buried. The Indians were not happy. I don't blame them. Right next to the Revolutionary War soldier are a couple graves from the 1850s. There's also the grave of an infant here that died in 1828. Seeing this stone relative to the other stones from around that same time period make me wonder if this stone was installed a couple decades after this infant died. It's a very ornate stone for the time, and seeing some of those hand-carved stones, I wouldn't be surprised if this stone took a while to be installed. After I film this video today, I'll be going to the Day of the Dead festival at Oakland Cemetery, and I may add a few shots from that at the end of this video. This here is the plot of the Marble Hill Sunday School. I believe it was a fire that started in the Sunday school, killing everyone inside the Sunday school, including the teacher. You can see someone's gone around and put a bunch of rubber duckies and little toy cars on all the headstones. I've always loved this really long staircase going out of the north side of the old section of the cemetery. And here is that long staircase from the bottom. Before we leave this old section, a little bit more history, or my riffs on history about Decatur. The only reason Atlanta exists is because Decatur was too pretentious to allow a railroad to end in their town. And so thus Terminus was founded 6 miles to the west, which then became Marthasville, which then became Atlanta. Another beautiful thing about this cemetery, in between the old and the new section, and running up the eastern side of the newer section, is Peachtree Creek, and they've turned it into a park. Back when I lived in Decatur, this was just a little field. It's really grown up over the years. Jezzy used to love this part of the cemetery. I'd let her off leash and she'd run all up and down the trail. This hillside to our right is the eastern edge of the newer section. At one time they would fence it off and have goats go all up and down it to eat some of this underbrush. I miss the dew. Before I leave the trails here, I think I'll fade in a photo of Jezebelle. She was a wonderful dog, and I love her very much. As we wrap up here in the old section and head into the new, I must share this absolute classic bit. Seacrest out. This is the lake here in the newer section of the cemetery, the old section there in the background. This is very much a park you can spend an afternoon in. One of the first things, if you notice it when you pull into the cemetery, is this grave here. He's not actually buried here. He's buried under this stone here, Mr. Philip David Hicks. He died when he was 17 years old. I used to come and sit on this grave and study during college. Probably spent more time walking to and fro than I actually did sitting here reading, but nonetheless, a beautiful little place to have a seat and read. This section is home to all the cremated remains, and it is one of the few, if not only, places in Atlanta where you can see my last name. If you wind up donating your body to science after you die, and your family doesn't get the remains back, they may wind up here. Up on the crest of the hill in the new section, we can see that bridge down there and that trail that lines the outside of the cemetery. Here's another one of those wind thingies. It's not windy this morning, otherwise this thing really gets to spinning. You could walk right by this stone and never know that this beautiful carving was on the other side. Beneath it, it reads, "The path which we once strolled, now closed by the web of time, awaits our return." I've always loved this stone right here of this log cabin seen in the mountains. And right behind it is another one. I often wonder how these types of stones will age. Last night was daylight savings time, so it shows 9 o'clock, but it's actually 8. Decatur Cemetery is still an active cemetery, and there's a tent set up here, some chairs, and this will be for some cremains, thus the smaller hole. Here's a nice poem. You can pause the video if you'd like to read it. Here's a reason why it's important to wander through some of the graves as opposed to just stay on the main roads. It's on the back of the stone and it lists all their children, and at the bottom it says, "That's why it was never dull." Here's something I've never seen before. It's got 2 dulcimers on the top of the stone. I'll end this video with this parting shot here of the cemetery. I spent my morning really thinking about my dog Jezebelle. She's the reason I came to this cemetery all the time. She's the reason I fell in love with cemeteries. I miss her every day and I love her so much. Thank you for bringing me here, Jezzy. Smile.